All right, gentlemen, let's talk about Davos today, our favorite gathering of globalists. During the event, Trump went wild, hammering everyone in attendance, laughing at Canada again and threatening tariffs, scolding Bank of America, and generally telling Wall Street a new story. This should come as no surprise given that on this season of The Apprentice, Trump's biggest allies are the oil business and huge tech titans. He just replaced Jamie Dimon with Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. But I want to discuss Trump's most frightening demand. He wants to dominate global oil markets through threats and demands. Donald Trump is now directing Saudi Arabia and OPEC to reduce the global price of oil. Furthermore, Trump wants central banks throughout the world to instantly decrease interest rates. Seriously, I'm not kidding. He actually said this. This is the epitome of a global hegemon using its power. We now know that during the Biden administration, it was done behind the scenes, but at least Trump is open about it. What you see is what you get. Trump wants Saudi Arabia to contribute $1 trillion in the United States, essentially to fund his AI plan for world dominance, which we'll discuss another time. However, we must discuss the US urging the Middle East to cut the price of oil. The goal is to stop the conflict in Ukraine. Trump simply wants to crash petroleum prices in order to reduce Russian profits, thus depriving Putin's war chest of cash. It's the same old game. He is also attempting to get China to compel the Russians to sign a peace deal. Obviously, this would be on America's terms, but we all know that this would not work. China will not forsake Russia since they will be the next target of all economic penalties. And why give up cheap Russian crude as well? Consider Russia's economic status. We are constantly hearing that the economy is overheating, interest rates are too high, and Moscow will fall tomorrow. But is this actually the case? Despite the commodities and financial restrictions, Russia's revenues are increasing rather than decreasing. December's income exceeded 4 trillion rubles, or $40 billion, a 28% increase over the previous year. Oil and gas earnings have been relatively constant over the previous decade. In reality, non-oil and gas revenue is increasing, indicating that the Russian economy is growing less dependent on its energy industry. Sanctions are ineffective, and even if they do succeed, they will not stop the war machine. So, is Trump's motivation truly about Russia? What is the true purpose of urging OPEC to lower oil prices? Perhaps it has more to do with the US economy. Trump wants to start a hazardous tariff war with the rest of the globe, punishing not only China, but also the G7, Europe, and Asia. Basically, every country in the world is on the menu. Inflation in the United States is beginning to recover. The CPI increased from 2.7% to 2.9% in December, and the cost of living situation is worsening. Why do you believe Trump wants lower energy prices? Trump also wants global central banks to decrease interest rates. It's easy to see why. If they all do, there would be less competition for money. The Federal Reserve can then decrease its own rates to relieve pressure on the US economy. The most serious issue, however, is how nations may respond to the US trade war. Not everyone will take this lying down. It will result in mutual financial ruin. If Canada dares to say that other countries, particularly China, would undoubtedly respond, they would impose their own trade restrictions on US imports. In addition, suppliers of key minerals may impose export restrictions. As a result, US companies would be forced to defend themselves as input costs rise, so do manufacturing expenses. As a result, US customers are paying more for American goods. To sell worldwide, US exporters will also need to cut their pricing, and these are the implications for the US economy as a result of the trade war. US GDP may shrink by 1.3% this year. That overshadows the economic growth spurred by Trump's tax cuts. As a result, inflation would get worse. Both the trade battle and the tax package might raise CPI by 0.7% in total. Attempting to reshore production will be a huge risk for Trump. His economic agenda will come under pressure. He will be functioning in a world where all countries are afraid of the United States. Many countries, particularly the BRICS, are dollarized and already trade outside of the USD. But let's take a closer look at Saudi Arabia. Does Mohammed bin Salman have any motive to comply with Trump's demands? Will he push Saudi Aramco or OPEC to sell oil at a discount? Between Trump and Saudi Arabia, the monarchy has an edge, particularly in terms of pricing power. Despite growing inflation, Saudi Arabia still boasts the world's lowest oil production cost at $10 per barrel. The price of oil is currently about $80. Therefore, the profit margin is enormous. The kingdom is doing really well financially, so certainly, Mohammed bin Salman can sell his oil at a discount if he wants to. If the Saudis significantly increase production and flood the globe with exports, prices will fall. But here's the quandary. Why would Saudi Arabia do that? First and foremost, Mohammed bin Salman is coping with a significant fiscal imbalance. He's attempting to raise investment funds totaling around 3% of GDP. As a result, he must maximize both export volume and pricing. Sure, plummeting oil prices might assist Trump's administration by lowering inflation, but we must examine who has the largest economic imprint in the Middle East, which is China. Beijing has the most extensive trade links with the OPEC countries. In comparison, the United States is virtually non-existent. The bulk of Saudi imports are from China. Beijing is also the largest consumer of Saudi oil exports, and with China increasing domestic demand, Mohammed bin Salman does not want to damage their partnership. Rising Chinese demand would result in higher oil prices and increased revenue for the kingdom. There is no actual reason to listen to the US. However, the US economy is deteriorating. Trump intends to cut energy prices in half, with bills dropping by 50% over the following year. That is his vow. And it is part of the reshoring strategy to make US manufacturing inexpensive in order to encourage a large number of firms to manufacture in the United States. And I'm also going to ask Saudi Arabia and OPEC to bring down the cost of oil. You've got to bring it down, which frankly, I'm surprised they didn't do before the election. If the price came down, the Russia-Ukraine war would end immediately. Right now, the price is high enough that that war will continue. You've got to bring down the oil price. You've got to end it now. I hope you can identify the contradictions here. If the United States owns the world's greatest reserves of oil and gas, why not extract it yourself? Why not export it rather than having the Saudis do the work? Because Trump wants to maximize revenues for US energy firms. The Saudis can dump additional barrels on the cheap, while the US withholds production, or they may sell to Europe at a premium. There's another element to consider. The expense of drilling for oil in the United States is quite high. The break-even point for most US enterprises ranges between $59 and $70. The Permian Basin, the largest oil-producing area in the United States, averages approximately $65. So there is a limit to how low the price of oil may fall. If it falls too much, US oil wells might become unprofitable immediately. Trump wants Saudi Arabia to perform his dirty work by reducing their own margins for the US. He also intends to replenish the strategic reserves when prices fall. I'd be very astonished if OPEC or the Saudis listen to Trump completely. Beyond only decreasing inflation, the US intends to utilize oil to affect geopolitics. The ultimate purpose is to maximize profits while increasing US economic reliance. So here's the plan. The US wants Iran's output to fall due to sanctions and then replace Iranian supplies with their own. This will maintain business margins while encouraging additional countries to buy from US companies. What currency will you use to purchase oil from Trump? Obviously, the US will need you to pay in dollars. As a result, this measure indirectly defends the petrodollar system. There are several levels to Trump's program, yet it is easy to summarize everything. Washington seeks to profit at the cost of others without undertaking the unpleasant labor themselves. Whoever controls energy production controls world politics. Even as we shift toward renewable energy, the need for oil and gas will only increase. We will increase from 100 million barrels per day in 2025 to over 120 million by 2045. Demand will continue to rise in all.